Welcome back to Between the Edits. My name is Grace, and today I have the absolute joy of interviewing McKenzie Melody. She is a pre-published author who's working on querying one of her debut novels. She also has a professional writing degree and works in marketing. So I'm really excited to dive into both fiction and marketing type subjects here. And we'll have a lot of fun discussion as well about some folklore to come later. So really excited to get to talk to you today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space?
Yeah. So like you said, my degree is in professional writing. And I wanted to be a novelist a long time since I was very young. And so that is kind of why I chose to pursue that in college. And then while I was in college is where I took a lot of classes in like business market writing and like marketing and social media and that kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I also really like this. Like this is maybe something that I could do in the meantime while I'm trying to build up this career. Um, and so that's kind of how it started. I graduated from college in 2018. So it's been like a little while now. Yeah, I've continued to grow that career, which has been really fun, but always really stuck to my dream of publishing a book. That's what I really want to do. And I didn't have like any of my own social media or anything until I went to a writers conference in 2019 where they were talking about like the importance of having social media for authors and like building your platform. And I was like, I could probably do that.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of like how it started.
Amazing. Okay, so I want to take us back just a minute here. Reading and writing, the love of which came first for you?
Definitely reading. So my family still makes fun of me because I loved books always. I read like super early. And I loved Magic Treehouse and the Chronicles of Narnia. And the Chronicles of Narnia was like a full obsession. I only read that for like 2 years, just over and over and over again. And then my dad would always tell me that I should be a writer because I liked books so much. And as a little kid, I was like, that sounds like a lot of work. I just like reading books. I don't want to write them. So my family still makes fun of me for that because it wasn't until I was like a young teenager that I decided that writing was something that I really wanted to do. Before then, I just loved books.
Amazing. Okay. So then you have this love of reading, right? I love the idea of only reading like the Chronicles of Narnia for 2 years in a row. Like that just, yeah, that's amazing.
Best.
And so that slowly transitions into you start to have these own ideas about stories in your head or rewriting the stories that you had, were reading as a child, getting more into that, having that compulsion maybe, or that desire to write. How does that transition into what you choose to pursue professionally for the professional writing and then the marketing?
So it's really, you actually described that so exactly correct how that happened. What happened was that I read a book series that I really enjoyed, but there were no female characters in it at all. And I was like, there's no girls in this book. And like, it would be great if there were. And so I started, like, my parents and I would always read before bed. And I would rewrite all the chapters that we had read that night to include this other character that I'd made up myself. And I enjoyed that so much that I just kept doing it and I was holding it all in my head. And this went on for like years. And then finally, I was like, I have so much material that's just in my head. I could probably write my own stories that aren't based on like other people's characters. So I was 13 or 14 probably when that happened. And I also felt at the time like the kind of books that I liked to read, it was really difficult to find. So I really like history, but I also love magic and mythology. And while I was raised and like still continue in like a strong faith tradition, I didn't like reading books that were like from a specifically Christian point of view. And so I was really struggling to find things that were really like adventurous and fantastical and amazing, but also more like anchored in our own world and in like real historical periods. And so I was like, well, I could just write these. So that's kind of how it started. And then I spent years, no one in my family knew anything about how to be a writer or like how one does that. But my parents really supported me. They've always really supported me and my siblings in anything that we wanted to do and were interested in, which is amazing. And so they like took me to writers conferences. We like went and met authors at like different signings and events and that kind of thing, just trying to like gather all the information that we could. So
I
then
love that.
I went to college for that. And at the time that I went to college, I kind of thought there was nothing else in the world that I would enjoy as much as fiction writing. And while that's true, I did find that in a way, marketing is a lot like fiction writing, because when you're selling something to someone, you're just telling them a story. And so I
Mhm.
found that that was a way that I could use my skills in like a marketable way that would allow me to get jobs and that kind of thing. Because the traditional publishing path is long and arduous and it takes years. And there's a lot of just like rejection and unsureness along the way. And so this gave me something that was a little bit more stable, but that was still in the wheelhouse of the things that I loved.
Amazing. Okay, so you effortlessly just transitioned us into the next couple of questions that I had planned here. So thank you for that.
No.
Um, we'll start with for someone who may not know, right? How would you describe what a professional writing degree is? What kind of classes do you take? What is the substance? What does professional writing mean?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And that's actually the reason that I chose the university that I went to, which was Taylor University in Indiana. Part of the reason was professional writing, and the other part was that they would let me spend semesters in Ireland, which is a totally different subject. But I, so it's a really unique degree, and not a lot of universities offer it. And the idea of it was that it was both writing and business. So
Mm,
kind of the idea was that like a lot of the problem with typical like English or creative writing degrees is that you learn a lot about writing and wordsmithing and the process of publishing, but you don't learn a lot about how to actually get jobs and how to make
mm.
writing skills marketable in the job market. You know how to write a really good book, but like that can oftentimes be it. So in professional writing, I took business classes. I did seminars on like how to do your taxes as someone who works for themselves.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah, which was great. Like screenwriting for TV.
Mm.
I took classes in that, in like editing and in like working in a publishing house, like classes on that kind of thing. I had a class where we made a mock publishing house and like took a book through the whole process, which was really fascinating. A little bit of graphic design, marketing and social media. So just a whole lot of different areas where writing skills are useful, sort of like expanding your mind past just the idea of being a novelist, even though that is what like most of us entered the degree wanting to do.
I love that. That's so fascinating. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
like, these are all these things also that I feel like play into if you want to be a novelist, right? Of course, you need to make sure you
exactly.
have a good novel, but
Mhm.
you also have to like, especially in today's world, if you're doing the traditional publishing route, you've got a lot more support that you can draw from the publishers. But if you're doing
Right.
self-publishing at all, everything you mentioned are things that people struggle to figure out how to do or realize that they have to do and did not know beforehand. So everything that you just listed right there is like I could check it off on a list of like I've heard people who are doing self-publishing talk about I had to learn how to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And especially now, it used to be like self-publishing was you had to do everything by yourself, and traditional publishing was the publisher does everything for you. And
Mhm.
these days, it's not that way at all. Self-publishing is still you do pretty much everything yourself, and traditional publishing is you still do a lot of things yourself. And so knowing how to do marketing and business and your own taxes, and because you're running your own business, really at that
Mhm.
point. Um, is like super important. And I just think it's something that not a lot of people learn or like have a way to be educated in. So that's something that I really thought was cool about that program.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm so excited that we discussed that because it sounds like such a unique degree opportunity and, really well put together. So then transitioning into the other question I had that you kind of
Mhm.
alluded to before, you talked about how you realized that fiction writing and marketing have some similarities because in both you're trying to tell someone a particular story. So one of the questions I had for you is that very point, what are the similarities that you've noticed between creative or fiction writing with marketing? And then what are the biggest differences that you see about having to intentionally change your mindset as you're engaging in either discipline?
Yeah, so they do have a lot of similarities because like I was like kind of alluding to selling something to someone, whether that's a physical product or a service or a way of life, is ultimately telling them a story. Like right now, your life is this way. And if you do this thing or buy this thing or take part in this seminar or whatever, your life will be this way. So it's telling them a story about who they are now and about what their life could be if they agree to buy from you. And that's what a lot of what marketing is. And so I found that my skills work really well for that because as someone who writes fiction, I was really taught to like paint a picture with words or like help someone to see a picture in their mind. And for selling and marketing, that's really super useful. And so it like immediately already kind of helped put me above, or at least on the same level with other people who had done only marketing or only nonfiction writing. And I think it really offers like something unique to my marketing writing that I don't think a lot of that all people who are in that industry have because I do have the strong fiction background. It is different though, because obviously when you're doing nonfiction and selling, nothing can be made up. A lot of laws against that. So there is like a lot more like intense fact checking that is involved. Obviously, as someone who does mostly books that are historically based, I do a lot of research and fact checking with my fiction anyway, but it's much more necessary. You know, it's okay for me to like shift a historical fact a little bit in a fiction book. It's not when I'm doing like an email campaign or something. So it is definitely different. And that also I think is good because I think there were different times in my life when I've done different types of careers or like done a little bit of editing or like ghostwriting and that kind of thing. And when everything that I do all day is the same. So like in the evening, I'm working on like writing my books and querying. And if that's what I'm doing all day too, I don't feel like I have a lot of energy for it. Whereas what I'm doing during the day feels so different that it's like a real switch that my brain can do in the evening. And I don't feel like I'm exhausted. But at the same time, it's still something that I love and I'm interested in.
Right. I can absolutely relate to that of ever since I've started transitioning my, professional pursuits into doing more of this, right? So I do developmental editing and I also do my own writing and I do the podcast and like it was like one thing after another kind of fit of like there's a through thread of I love books, reading and writing. But I get to change the hats that I wear throughout the day to tackle different things. And you're right, that actually is something to feeling like a bit of a you tap into one power source to do this one particular job. And then when you switch to a different hat, suddenly I've got a new battery for that. And
exactly,
it's easier to continue feeling motivated when you're able to kind of switch disciplines that you're using.
Exactly. That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. When you were talking about how in marketing, you need to basically like tell someone a story, right? It made me think about in marketing, they talk a lot about know who your target is, who your ideal client is.
Yeah.
In my brain, that's almost like building a character. Is that?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So how does that, I guess, when you're writing your stories and then you're also approaching marketing and building your ideal client, what are the questions you ask yourselves and how similar are they in those processes?
I would say they are really similar because you are, in a sense, building a character. Like a lot of times in marketing, it's called an avatar. And it's sort of like, because a lot of people are going to be seeing this Facebook ad or this email or whatever, but you're condensing it down into one single avatar, the person that you're most trying to speak to. And a lot of times you will figure out things like that person's gender, their age, what kind of stuff they're interested in, what job they work, where they live, what they're into during the day, what their family situation looks like. And this person isn't real, but they're kind of like a stand-in for your most perfect client because both in fiction writing and in marketing, if you're trying to speak to just one person, your message will end up being relatable to more people. Whereas if you're trying to speak to everyone, it's not going to be relatable to anybody.
Right.
But like really like zeroing in on one particular character, which feels like the opposite of what you would want to do, is actually what makes the book like specifically relatable to the largest group of people. And that's true in marketing too. So it is a lot the same because you're like, what is their age? What does their life look like? What kind of house do they live in? All those like little details are important, which is the same as building a character.
Right. It also makes me think you said there that when you write for whether it's marketing or fiction for a deep understanding of who that market is, that ideal client, that most perfect, you use the word avatar, you said in marketing,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when you're writing to that perspective, you end up reaching more people than if you tried to overgeneralize it. And so I think that's a really good touch as well for when it comes to fiction writing. The same thing kind of applies where if you try to take a novel or a concept for a novel or a story and overgeneralize it to make it appealable to like
Mhm.
everybody, you end up losing a lot of it because then it loses its sense of authenticity, perhaps
Exactly.
almost.
Exactly.
Amazing. I love that point. So next, I want to transition into the topic. So when I was looking for guests for this season, I came across your bookstagram, and it's just filled with folklore in general, but more specifically Celtic folklore.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your grandmother immigrated from Ireland.
She did, yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
beautiful. So obviously, this is like a rich family history and tradition for you. Um, I also have family who came from Ireland, not
Awesome.
nearly as recent as yours, but there was definitely something that was discussed in my mom's side of the family
Oh,
growing
that's
up,
cool.
and they took trips to Ireland, and we
Yeah.
have like all kinds of books with Celtic folklore. So I saw your bookstagram, and I was immediately like, oh, it feels amazing. So tell me about how you started dipping your toes into all of that.
Yeah, so I feel like I've always loved folklore and mythology, but I didn't always know what to call it. So I think if you had asked me if I was into folklore as a child, I would have had no idea what you were talking about because I didn't have any like access to that kind of stuff. My parents traveled a lot before we were born, so our house was very like eclectic and full of things from all over the world, but there was not a lot of books on folklore and mythology and that kind of thing. But I always found those kind of stories and fairy tales and that sort of thing interesting. And I was always obsessed with Ireland from the time I was an extremely small child. Like you were saying, my grandma came to the US when she was 17 or 18. And she was the youngest of 11 siblings. And most of them stayed in Ireland or at least like that area of Europe. And so we still have a lot of family that lives in Ireland who we would like get Christmas cards from every year. And my parents have been there several times. My dad actually is an Irish citizen because she was still an Irish citizen when he was born. And I'm working on my citizenship right now.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, so like I said, one of the reasons that I chose Taylor was because of the Irish Studies program that they had at the time, which doesn't exist in the same way anymore. But at the time, it was this really special program where you could go to Ireland during your first semester of freshman year with
Mm.
this really small group of students who you would become really close to. And for someone like me who was very shy, that made like transitioning back onto the actual campus easier because I came with
Oh, I
friends
bet.
already.
Mhm.
And so I was really excited about this program for a lot of reasons, mostly because I was finally going to be able to go to Ireland. And the program was amazing because it was a lot of what they called like out of the classroom learning. So we
Mm.
did do some learning in classrooms, but most of our learning and our classes took place on the road. Like we drove all over Ireland, the entire country, um, saw all different parts of it, the touristy things and also the things that like no one really goes and sees. And I had always known that I loved Ireland and Irish history and the culture that had been like so strongly passed down through my family, like the food and the music and the way that we talked about it and the fact that like everyone had so much firsthand experience that I was finally getting to have. But the folklore is really something that surprised me and that I just found this deep love for while I was there. So I ended up doing a second semester in Ireland while I was in college. And then I also did my internship there in marketing and lived there for a summer. And I've like gone back and forth several times since. But that that interest kind of stayed with me. And over time, as I was building my Instagram, everyone is always saying, as I'm sure you know, when you're building social media, that you need to find a niche, like
Mhm.
something that isn't just selling your
Mhm.
books or your services or whatever, that you can talk about on your social media so that you're also offering something to people instead of just like always asking them to buy something from you.
Right.
If you want to create like, growth and real like vibrant community. And for years, I feel like I was just thinking about like, what is that thing that I'm super into that isn't writing that I could offer to people, gather other people who are interested in these topics. And I wanted a topic that would tie into the kind of books that I wrote so that
Mhm.
if I was able to create a good community on Instagram that cared about that thing, then those would maybe translate into people who would be like interested in buying my books someday or be interested in reading them. And it took me a really long time. And over at the same time, I was kind of going on this parallel journey of my interest in folklore, just like growing and growing and growing and like reading books and listening to podcasts and sort of developing this like amateur folklore interest. And finally I was like, I think it's this. I know a lot about this and I'm not really doing anything with the information except writing books that
Mhm.
sometimes have these creatures in them. And I really think it would be fun to talk about it more. And so that's how I started Fairy Friday, which is my weekly uh folklore blog post
Mhm.
that I do on my Instagram. And I love it. It's so fun. And I feel like
It
I
is.
found so many other people who are interested in folklore or who like these stories and like bits of lore that I've discovered. And the research for it is so fun. It's really just become like such a great joyous creative outlet in my life.
Amazing. And I've loved seeing the posts too. Like some of them I've definitely heard of before. Some of them were completely new to me. And like there's
Sometimes.
this really fun, like it's almost like a writing prompt kind of thing. Like you see this creature and you're like, oh my gosh, where can I use this? How can I use these ideas?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I love seeing them. I wanted to ask you, can you define folklore for us a little bit? And then kind of let us know, what is the appeal of folklore? Why do people love it? Why are we drawn to this?
Okay. So this is a little bit of a hard question because I feel like in the folklore community, people have different opinions on this.
Okay.
But I would say that the difference between, like, for example, the word folklore and the word mythology, which are slightly different, is that folklore includes a lot of things. So very much the beliefs that like regular people had. Stories about pantheons of gods or like
Mhm.
classical myths, which most cultures have.
Mhm.
Um, those more like literary forms of mythology. So like in Ireland, you would have like the Fenian cycle or the Ulster cycle that are these larger, more literary like hero tales.
Like the hero's journey, that would be
Right.
an example that probably many people have heard of because it's often
Yes.
associated with like Greek literature.
Yes, like Greek mythology.
Mhm.
Those are different than folklore. And because folklore is more, in my mind, is what regular people believed on a day-to-day basis. And it also includes the practices
Mm.
that developed from those beliefs. So like, for instance, in Ireland, there was this belief that like in a little cottage, that a lot of people lived in at the time, after you had cleaned the floor, normally you would throw that bucket of dirty water out the front door. But in Ireland, you don't want to throw the bucket of water out the front door until you've let the fairies know that you're going to be doing that. Because
Mm.
if you throw the bucket of water out without letting the fairies know, then they might get doused in this dirty water because they're hanging around your front door and they're going to be super angry about that and you're going to feel the repercussions. So there's that. It's kind of like the beliefs that people had and the practices of everyday living and the like festivals and feast days that people celebrated that had to do with those beliefs. And it's interesting because a lot of times people will associate folklore with paganism. And in some ways, that is true. Like a lot of times these beliefs did start in these countries pre the arrival of Christianity. So like in Ireland, pre the
Mhm.
arrival of St. Patrick. But that's actually not where they stopped developing, especially in places like Ireland and Scotland, other places too, but I have the most experience and like research with that. Those beliefs continued to develop within Christianity and being
Mhm.
connected to like Catholic feast days and the church
Right.
calendar and all that kind of stuff, which is really interesting to me. Also, like both those elements, both the like pre-Christian element and the like church calendar element are very interesting because it's all folklore. And I think, I don't know, the reason that it interests us, I think there's a lot of different reasons, but I think there's a lot of desire now from people to go back to a simpler way of life because
Mm.
life feels like it's gotten so chaotic and crazy with like the 24-hour news cycle and social media and everyone being able to know everything all the time. And everyone also telling you that it's your responsibility to be informed
Mhm.
every single thing all the time. First of all, that's not possible. And it's also not the way that
Amen.
we and I think it has created in people a desire to understand the way that our ancestors lived and the things they
Mm.
believe and the practices that they followed. And I think that's why in the past, like 10 to 15 years, but especially in the past like 5 to 10, I feel like there's been like an explosion of people who are interested in folklore and mythology topics that didn't
Mhm.
really exist like when I was a little kid, for example.
Right. I think there's also a bit of like charmingness to it of
Yeah,
like
there
it
is.
feels so far removed from how we live today. Like, especially
Uh-huh.
in America, it's a very like individualistic, secularized
Mhm.
society. And so learning about those things has like a sense of charm to it. And but also like we're talking about, I think it's also very interesting because it's like we still to this day feel the impact of those the cultural significance of those things, even though
Mhm.
we necessarily don't view them the same way. But it's fun to think about stopping before you throw out the wash water. But like in when those practices were first developed and believed, it was a true belief, right? And so it gives us a sense of the cultural heritage from the people before us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It does, and that's, like, a great way to say it. It's has, sort of a sense of, like, charm and interest and beauty to it, and also
Mm.
the community. Because you were talking about the individualism in America. A lot of these
Mhm.
practices, they're so based in community and the festivals and that kinda thing.
Right.
At Christmas, I always do a series at Christmas that's on Christmas folklore because there's so much of it all over the world, like creepy Christmas folklore. Um and I do it every year, and every year people are like, "How is there still so much more of this?" So much. But all of it is so based in community, and I think even if we don't recognize it, we really miss that community and the days when, like, your neighbors were a huge part of your life, and
Mhm.
that you kind of, like, couldn't survive without them, and all of you were making it work together, and we don't have as much of that in the
Mhm.
Western world today, and I think there's something within us that really misses it because we sorta know that's what we were made for.
Yes, absolutely. So you even mentioned right there that you've got this series where you talk about specific ones that are relevant to Christmas and things like that.
Mhm.
It may be like asking you to pick like a favorite child, but do you have a favorite kind of folklore mythological creature?
So broadly, I love fairies, which is why it's called Fairy Friday. A lot of things fit under the umbrella of fairies. So I would say what I have a lot of favorite fairy creatures. The banshee is definitely one of my favorites, and I've done that several times on Fairy Friday. Another is the one that I did this past Friday is the Ben Neary from Scotland, which is a very similar uh, kind of death omen female fairy creature. I have another like spooky one that I love is the Knuckleavee, which is a very creepy, spooky fairy creature from some of the northern islands in Scotland that I also love.
My sister and her family just recently visited Scotland, and they
Gosh,
did a
that's
massive
awesome.
trip. And yeah, and it was funny because they've been sending us pictures like all week long, and we're just like, oh, wish we could be there, right? But
Yes.
it's winter time and everything like that, so it was cold and windy, and there was rain and all that kind of stuff. But looking at these pictures, they were actually like the same exact vibe that you were posting for when you were talking about this most recent Fairy Friday, and I was like, ah, it's real. Anyway,
That photo is taken in Scotland.
well,
Yes.
there we go, perfect.
It's pretty
Um,
yes.
And as you're talking, talking about again, one of the reasons why maybe there's like an appeal to these things or a charm to them. And I think another thing that you were just talking about the death omen, that kind of related to me. It's tied to like you were talking about like religious practices, which in the Catholic tradition and many others as well, tied to seasons. right? And we
Yes.
see the same thing in folklore. And so it's like, it's also feels cool because it's almost like a way that our ancestors oriented themselves around the year
Yes.
and around different life cycles and different nature cycles. So it was one of their ways of navigating the world. And we can see like the continuation of that in these different, legends, folklore, and such.
Yeah, that's actually really important to me. I love the Wheel of the Year, which ties in incredibly well to the Catholic Church calendar.
Uh-huh.
And the feast days, a lot of them are the same as the like traditional days on the pagan Wheel of the Year. So like, Imbolc and Candlemas being like a very similar day, and All Saints Day and Samhain being like about the same day. I have become very interested in this over like the past few years, really. And it has given me such a strong sense of tie and connection both to the earth and the seasons, and
Mhm.
recognizing the way that my body and mood changes with the seasons, and the way that the earth changes throughout the seasons, and the way that that represents different things to us about like the story of our lives and the story of humanity. And I think we were meant to be connected to the world and the seasons that way. And these days we're just so far removed from it that we're not typically. But I think it's really worthwhile to learn about.
I love it. So, and we talked a little bit about your favorite, some of the appeals of folklore.
Mm.
What are some misconceptions that you've come across?
This is so, because I think there's a lot of good things about the fact that so many more people have become interested in folklore and mythology topics, like I was saying, over the past like 5 to 10 years. The problem with it is that there is a lot of misinformation
Mm.
that gets spread, especially through like memes on the internet. And I see these, they'll kind of make the rounds every couple of years. And I'll be like, oh, I've seen that one before. That are just like not really true. But they're said as truth, or they're written as truth, or they might be like part of the truth about
Mhm.
like the actual folkloric character. And so that, I think can cause damage in the community, because people will just like take and repost the first thing that they see, which is why like for me it's very important to do a lot of research. And I also, in all my weekly posts, cite all my sources in the comments so that people can go and see them if they have questions, or if they're like more interested in this. Because just like picking the first thing you see off the internet is like never a good idea. I also, another big thing that has really affected the understanding and the spread of misinformation in folklore, I feel like, is unfortunately fiction. There's a lot more fiction these days that includes folklore than, like I was saying, there was when I was a kid, which is great. And the thing about fiction is that if the folklore doesn't perfectly match what you want, you can just make up something different. But a
Mhm.
lot of times people don't realize that that's what you're doing,
Right.
especially when the book is like so deeply tied into folklore. There's
Mhm.
a lot of examples of this, but like Holly Black's books, for example, which I do love, like the Cruel Prince series is like really tied into fairy folklore specifically. And she's someone who grew up with a lot of folklore knowledge in her family. And so she knows a lot of it. And so the books feel very centered and grounded in folklore, which they are, but also there's a lot of stuff that she just made up, that then
Mhm.
gets
Conflated.
yes, like spread
Mhm.
as the real truth. This is also another weird source of this is Dungeons and Dragons, because they made up a lot of stuff too, and that gets like disseminated as real information, and then that just like continues to show up in books and that kind of stuff, and the misinformation just gets like furthered and furthered. So I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Yeah, so it sounds like there is like this very real historical root to folklore,
Mhm.
right? Where you can trace it back and you can see how actual people, this information guided the way that they lived their lives, right?
Mhm.
Whereas people can take that and like you would do with anything else, right? As a fiction author, as a creative author, you can take seeds of truth and you can bend them to
Mhm.
better suit your story, or to emphasize certain parts or de-emphasize other parts. So yeah, anytime you're reading anything that is fiction writing, you should always be asking yourself, okay, like, it may not be a true representation of it. I'd
Right,
be curious to
exactly.
hear your thoughts on, so you mentioned the Cruel Prince series, that as like being like a very good barometer for like the feel of folklore, but maybe not the exact historical roots of a lot of the things that she
Yes.
was discussing.
Yes.
How do you feel about Rebecca Ross's River Enchanted?
Oh, so I actually really love that duology.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites, and I read the first book so I love Rebecca Ross, and that
Mhm.
is my favorite duology of hers. Most people's favorite is
Divine
uh,
Rivals.
yes, Divine Rivals, which I also loved, but I just think A River Enchanted is so good. Um, I loved those books. So she did set them in a fantasy world, which is helpful
Mhm.
because then people are like, from the beginning, kind of know that you're making some stuff up.
Mhm.
Whereas if you connect your books to the real world, there's always going to be people who just are going to take it all at face value. So it is in a fantasy world, but it's obviously based on early medieval Scotland.
Mhm.
And I would say that even though there are definitely some things that she made up, it's like very clear to me that she did a lot of research for those books.
Mhm.
And there's a lot that feels very realistic about it, even in the ways that the fairies are written. So the fairies in those books are related to the elements. So like air, water,
Right.
fire, and earth, I think.
Mhm.
And that is not a belief that's like everywhere when it comes to the fairy folk, but it did exist in some parts of Scotland. And so because
Mhm.
of the fact that she's using Scotland specifically, it actually fits really well. And so obviously everything's not perfect. There are some things that she changed or added, but overall, I think she did a really good job with those books. I love them.
Amazing. Yeah, I also love them. I don't think I ever completely finished the second book because this is a complete tangent, but I was visiting my sister at the time. They were
Yeah.
living in Washington State. And so I was on a bit of a longer trip to stay with her. And so I
Yeah.
had gotten like a temporary library card. And I read the first book and I was trying to finish the second and I had to leave and I had to give
No,
my book
that's
back.
so
I know. And then for some reason, I've just never finished it. I don't know. So I need to.
yes, that's a great book.
Yes. Okay, cool. We were talking about it and I was just like, oh, I wonder. I
Honestly,
feel like you have, but you
I
have.
actually own like multiple copies of those books right now.
So well done. I mean, also just like from the folklore perspective, right? Or but
Mhm.
also just excellent writing, excellent storytelling,
So good. Yeah,
beautiful characters. Anyway,
I love that.
we're going to take a quick break from the conversation so I can tell you a little bit about a great product. I want to tell you about the Tertulia for Authors website builder. As someone who made their own website when I first started freelance editing, I can tell you that it took hours of frustration to end up with a website that had half the functionality of the Tertulia for Authors website builder. This resource is specifically designed for authors, whether you're published or not. It's easily customizable, incredibly user-friendly, and puts vital marketing tools at the fingertips of authors like blogs, event calendars, reader magnets, and email lists. And it's really affordable. So if you're an author looking to establish a website for the first time, or an author who already has a website but is looking to switch to a more manageable software, use the affiliate link in the description to sign up with Tortulia for Authors. Using this link does help support the podcast and is greatly appreciated. Now back to the podcast. Okay, so thank you. That was everything I could dream of and more. I love that conversation.
No problem. So fun.
We'll move on to my last couple questions here for you
Yeah.
in the time that we have left. Transitioning maybe away from specifically talking about folklore, more about to your experiences with writing, and going through the process of you're currently querying pre-published.
Yes.
So you're going traditional publisher.
Yes, that has always been my dream, and I feel I need to give it the best shot that I possibly can before I
Yes.
decide to go in a different direction. So yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing.
And like you mentioned before, it is not for the faint of heart. You
It
have
is
to be
not.
very comfortable with rejection. You have to spend a lot of time on it.
Yes.
So I was going to ask, going that route and feeling called to do that, have there been any big surprises for you that you didn't expect going into this process? And what have been some of your biggest influences in how you're navigating this publishing process and the book writing in general?
Good question. So I think this is going to sound crazy, but one of the biggest surprises for me was how quickly I became okay with the rejection. I think some people, it just really bothers them on a deep level. And I'm sure that this had to do with the fact that I went to college for writing. So I had experienced a lot of critique and rejection before that, just like having other people in the class read and review my work and doing that over and over again. And so, in a sense, I think that had desensitized me to it a little bit. But I worked really hard on removing, like, detaching the ideas of like, this agent doesn't want my book from this book is not good, which I think some people have a lot of difficulty detaching those things. But I have actually, known people who worked for literary agencies. And so I know for a fact that there are many reasons that a book gets turned down, and most of them are not, the book is not good. And so I think that helped me a lot. Detaching those things in my brain really helped, because then every time I get a no, it's pretty easy for me to just be like, okay, like this person wasn't the right one, wasn't intended for them, moving on to the next one. Because I will always tell people, I think if you're going to query or go the traditional route, honestly, if you're going to write books at all, because self-publishing includes its own amount of rejection.
Yes.
It's like book reviews and readers and all that. There's no way to write or pursue a creative career and not have it include rejection. That's just part of it. And some people really, really struggle with that. And I have always said that the most important thing, like if you're going to go forward and publish your books in any way, if they're ever going to be for more people than just you and your family, you have to be the number one person who believes in them. Like, no one can believe in them more and stronger than you. Because if you're depending on other people to like give you that belief in your own writing, they're never going to do that. Like, there's always going to be a rejection that makes you, and if every rejection makes you question your skills and talent and make you think your book isn't good, you're never going to survive in the industry. So that's the surprise. And also, I think the most important thing for me about querying, which I don't know if that was part of the question, it probably wasn't. But for me, that is, you have to believe in your own work, and you have to believe in it so strongly that like no one can shake that belief. Some of my biggest influences. So from an author standpoint, I've read most of Stephanie Garber's books and I really like them, but more than her books, I'm really inspired by her personal story. It's a lot like mine. She also wrote and queried for like many, many years, and then had a period where she was out of a job and ended up moving back in with her parents, which is also something that happened to me over the past year and a half. And I'm now out of that again. But that was like a big part of my story. And during that time, she just like wrote and wrote and wrote. And that's when she started querying and was able to finally get an agent. And that's like very similar to the way that my own story has gone kind of so far. And her books are so popular now, like like every one comes out as a New York bestseller, basically. And just, I've listened to her on podcasts before, and that story of starting out from a place of like dozens and dozens of rejections, and everyone being like, it's probably time that you give this up because you need to like really move on and like do something else with your life. I think of her and that story that I once heard on a podcast a lot, because it's just so encouraging to me.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the quintessentially what you're talking about is being the champion of your own book, right?
Yes.
And so I love that. I think more people need to take that approach to their writing, and instead of, especially a lot of the people who are getting into self-publishing, and it's like their first book, and things like that, and they're new to all of this. And if they don't go through extensive querying, right, you mentioned it earlier, exactly what happens is you release your book. Maybe you've had a couple beta readers, maybe you had an editor look at it, all that kind of stuff, but you release your book and you send out ARC copies and you start getting all of people's like book reviews, and you get the feedback one way or the other. So you're exactly right. It's like you're not saving yourself all of that rejection. It just comes after the book is published as opposed to before it. So you need to learn how to champion your own novel, and your own ideas and your own writing abilities, understanding that they're going to grow over time, right? That you're never going to reach perfection, but that somebody needs to believe in it so strongly, and it has to be you. How do you square that with appropriately accepting feedback?
Yeah, so that's actually a really important caveat, is that I think in order to believe that strongly in your books, you also have to know that you have done everything possible to become the best writer you can be.
Mm.
So that confidence in your own work, it's hard for it to exist when you're like unsure of your own abilities. And I really think the only way to become more confident in your writing is to really pursue every avenue that you can in learning to write and learning, like really learning the craft before you like
Mhm.
go out there and try to publish it and query it, whatever. Whether that's college or it's like online courses, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. I went to college for writing, but most of my friends who are writers did not,
Mhm.
and still have been able to learn those skills through like different avenues. So I think that is a really important part of it. And also the feedback and critique, because like I was saying, I think that that is what has enabled me to be able to withstand rejections because
Mm.
I've experienced so much critique before. And I know that it usually comes from a place of someone really trying to help you with this book. And it's always going to be a little bit difficult because it is like a part of your soul that you're putting out there in the end. But I have found that the more critique I've had, it always helps the book. You
Mm.
know, even like beta readers on this book that I'm querying right now, this has been my most successful querying process yet. And I had the most beta readers on this book that I've ever had. I think I
Mm.
had like 11 or 12, which is like not normal for me at all. And it is important to find people that you can trust because I've heard like horror stories of that too.
Yeah.
But having opinions of people that like I trusted and I also have read their writing or seen their content or seen what kind of books they read and know that we have very similar ideas about like the kind of stories that we write and read.
Mhm.
Having all of that input only ever made the book stronger, even when it
Mhm.
was hard to hear at the time. And so I think humbling yourself to that, being humble in general is an important part of the creative process, but that's part of the reason is because if you're someone who like bucks against any kind of critique, you're never going to grow. And growth is so necessary because we're always growing constantly.
Mhm. Another thing that that you touched on there that kind of tying back into what we were talking about earlier of really finding your ideal client, finding your market, creating the characters and having that vision for your book so that you can write it better. You're writing to a specific
Mhm.
person who represents a small group, not a general population in which you're not going to reach that many people anyway.
Right.
Should you have the same approach to your beta readers?
I think it's a similar approach. So in when I am choosing beta readers, I like to do a mix of writers and readers. I think a lot of times people will only have their writing friends read their books for them. And I do
Mhm.
think it's important to also have some people who aren't necessarily writers, but are just people who read in that genre a lot.
Mm.
Because, you know, writers will have a lot of things to help you with the specific like craft of the writing. But people who just read in that genre a lot are going to be able to tell you, like, does this book work? Is it like
Mhm.
the expectations of the genre? Or are readers going to be mad? Um, and so that is a big part of it. Trust is a huge part of it because especially
Mm.
with AI and everything, there's a lot of pitfalls with like choosing the wrong beta readers. So for me, it always has to do with like people I already have an established relationship with who I
Mhm.
trust. Sometimes they'll come to me and sometimes I will ask specific people to do it. And that does have a lot to do with the books that I know that they read, the things I know that they're interested in, the kind of books that they like. When you're friends with someone, usually that's something that you can figure out about them. So all those things are related because if you're getting feedback from someone who doesn't read your kind of book or doesn't like that kind of book, that feedback's not going to be helpful.
Right.
And a person that you trust is going to offer the feedback in a way that they know isn't hurtful to you, but also that you understand.
Mhm.
Um, and that's really important too, I think.
Amazing. Okay. last question before we do our fun wrap-up question.
Mhm.
How has so generally speaking, might be setting you up for failure here, but generally speaking, of all the things we discussed, right? So we've talked about how you've done your professional writing and marketing. We've talked about how that's influenced your fiction and creative writing. We've talked about your Celtic folklore backgrounds and all the interest in that, the querying process that you've been through multiple times now, and kind of the personal story behind that. How has going through all of this changed your perspectives on other things in work, life, media?
It's a good question. I see everything as a story and everything is always a research opportunity. So that's a big part of it. I feel like I really enjoy reading other books and watching TV shows, but there will always definitely be a part of my brain that I can't turn off. And I will always be the friend that's like, that's a giant plot hole. When we're like watching a TV series, or like, where did that plot thread go? But I think so it definitely has changed the way that I see the world. I always see everything through the lens of story. I've been talking with my younger sister recently about some big decisions that she's making in her life that, are one of those things where it's like, my life could go this way or my life could go this way. And to me, I always describe it as the idea of your life could be this storyline or it could be this storyline. Because I think that's just the way that I see the world. And all those things have built into that to my everything is a story. Folklore and mythology, which I think that's just kind of the way humans are. We love stories and we understand the world through stories. But for me, that is especially true.
Yes. Yeah, it actually reminded me, there was another woman who will be on the podcast. I'm not sure which episode she is yet, but you guys will know. She was talking about how she kind of takes a similar approach of like thinking about your life in the context of a story, like using that as almost like a training tool for our emotions and how our emotions affect our behaviors, and
That's
correlating those two, because she's talking about with her children, kind of saying like, they're struggling with these things. Maybe they're not old enough to completely rationalize through things, or maybe they are, yada, yada, yada. It can work for multiple age ranges, but thinking about, okay, now this is a character in a story and you love this character and you want this character to succeed and do good things. What should they do in this scenario that you're facing? And so taking
really good.
your
Yeah.
ego out of it, putting yourself into the shoes of a character who you love and you want to see succeed. Now write the story. How do they handle the situation you're going through?
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really cool. That's kind of what you reminded me here when you're talking about like discussing this with your sister. She's, two roads diverge and she has to choose, and it's like, you're the character. Which
Exactly.
is better for the character?
It also helps like when things go wrong in your life. A lot of times I'll be like, well, this would be really interesting if I was reading a book though.
Yeah.
Makes the things that are hard in life feel like a little bit better or a little bit lighter, a little bit less serious. Cause I'm like, well, in the books, these things happen, but it always works out. So I'm sure it will work out.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So we're going to wrap up with this last fun question.
Got it.
Arguably maybe the most difficult question of the entire podcast, although I hope many weren't difficult. 2 to 3 book recommendations for our listeners. What do you have for us?
Okay, so my favorite book series in the world, and this is going to tie into a lot of things we talked about on this podcast, is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. There's 3 books. They are adult, but that's just because the characters are in their 30s. So there's like no content, like sexual or violent or anything really like that. I'm obsessed with these books. Yeah, they're set in the Edwardian era in England, but in a world where fairies are real and are studied as like a scientific discipline.
Oh.
They're so good. So that's my favorite series. We have talked about Rebecca Ross, all Rebecca Ross books forever. I will recommend, but I would say that her duology, A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless are my favorite of hers. A recent one that I really loved. So I've already talked about Holly Black on this podcast, but I feel like there is not enough love for her adult duology, which is Book of Night and Thief of Night. These books are a little darker. They like lean a little darker, a little spookier, and a little bit more like thrillery, but still with a lot of folklore content. I love them, and no one ever talks about them. I just finished the second book, And yeah, so those are some.
Amazing. And like you already mentioned on here, we'll give a special honorable mention to Stephanie Garber.
Yes, I
Garber.
especially love her second trilogy, which is A Curse for True Love is the last book, but the first book is Once Upon a Broken Heart.
Nice.
That's one of my
Yeah.
favorite trilogies also.
Awesome. Amazing. All right. Well, these are so fun. I'm going to have to check out, well, I've already, Rebecca Ross, I am a big fan of hers already, but I'll have
Yep.
to check out the other ones. And I know everybody else will too. I have truly like enjoyed this conversation. You are so well spoken. You like effortlessly explain these concepts. And so I'm really excited for people to get to learn more about you. If they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
So definitely the best way is my Instagram, which is McKenzie Melody Author. It's Mackenzie without an A, so it's just MCK. And then I also have a website, which is kenziemelody.com. And it's Kenzie, Kenzi. But my Instagram is definitely the best place. I'm on there the most often.
Amazing. Awesome. So anyone can go follow along with her and uh, keep up with the Fairy Fridays and all of her querying and what she's working on. So I can't thank you enough for taking the leap of faith and being on the podcast today. And I'm so excited that I got to talk with you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.